Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
And I am Ken.
And you may recognize our voices from the podcast Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Missing and Unsolved. But today we're here to tell you about a nonprofit organization we have created called the Florida Themis Project.
Themis is the Greek goddess of justice, if you're wondering about the name.
The Florida Themis Project aims to support loved ones and victims of unsolved crime by financially contributing to various types of investigative tools, including DNA testing.
We also help the families and loved ones of missing people by assisting with awareness campaigns, helping in ground searches, and any other assistance that we can provide to the families.
We're asking you for your help to spread the word and grow our organization so we can help as many people as possible.
So please be sure to check out our website at floridathemisproject.org for info about how you can help or donate.
We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Florida Themis Project.
Even simply sharing our posts on social media is very helpful.
So thank you in advance, true crime friends, for your help and support. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I am Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Missing and Unsolved.
This is a Tomahawk Media production covering true crime,
missing people,
unsolved crime,
and cold cases.
Please check out our website, paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, and links to all of our social medias.
On the website, we also have a virtual tip jar, so you can leave us a tip and we'll give you a shout out on the show.
Another way to support this show is to join our Tomahawk Media Patreon.
On Patreon, you'll receive early and ad-free episodes for all of our Tomahawk Media shows, and depending on what tier you choose, bonus content and even special gifts from us might come right to you.
Yes, and you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/Tomahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media. There's also going to be a link in the show notes.
So, Lauren, tonight we're covering the case of the Walker family.
Yes, this episode is being created in conjunction with the Florida Themis Project. One of Florida's most brutal and haunting unsolved murders occurred in Osprey, Florida, 6 days before Christmas in 1959. Christine, aka Tilly Walker, age 24, her husband Cliff, age 25, and their children Jimmy, 3, and Debbie, only 1 year old, were all murdered in their home on December 19th, 1959. The family lived on a cattle ranch, the Palmer Ranch, where Cliff worked as a ranch hand. On the morning of December 20th, 1959, Daniel McLeod, a co-worker of Cliff's, went by the ranch to pick Cliff up. They had plans to go hog hunting that day. Pulling up to the Walker's small home in his truck, McLeod immediately found it odd that the house was dark and relatively quiet. Furthermore, Cliff's Jeep and the family car were in the yard, although the automobile wasn't in the location where it was usually parked. Assuming that Cliff had overslept, he knocked loudly on the door but got no answer. The front door was locked and he noticed a cut tree and some of Christine's gifts on the porch, which was strange. McLeod went around to the back of the house. The back screen door was latched, so he peered through the windows and was able to discern a single dim light. Someone was in there, but why was no one answering his knocks? Initially thinking that the pilot light on the gas heater had gone out and the house had filled with deadly fumes, killing the family, he cut a hole in the screen with his pocket knife and unlocked the door. There he discovered the entire family, slaughtered.
Christine was found lying lifeless in the doorway to the living room. Still thinking that maybe they had all been killed by carbon monoxide, McLeod ran to her thinking he could drag her outside and revive her. But when he got closer, that's when he realized there was blood everywhere. Cliff was lying in the corner of the living room, and 3-year-old little Jimmy was curled up next to his father. Both were covered in blood. Debbie, not even 2 years old, was nowhere to be found at this point, but was later discovered shot and drowned in the family's bathtub. Now, McLeod ran from the house and hopped in Cliff's Jeep. He drove to the local IGA supermarket where there was a payphone. However, he didn't have a dime to put into the payphone and continued driving until he came upon a woman just opening a nearby restaurant. Now, there was no telephone in the restaurant, but the lady did give him a dime so he could call the Sarasota police. I could not imagine what he was feeling after seeing your friend's entire family slaughtered and then struggling to drive around to find a payphone, to find a dime.
All right, I know.
To finally come back and actually contact the police. So here's some of what we know. The Walker family had been out that day, shopping and running various errands. Now, Christine was on her own and Cliff was off with the children. Christine had gone grocery shopping and Cliff had taken the children to do some Christmas shopping. And also, since he had been wanting to trade in the family car for a later model, he had stopped by a car lot to see what was available at the time. Now, it is believed that Christine arrived at home first, roughly around 4 p.m. She was sexually assaulted and then shot in the head with a .22 caliber firearm. Cliff later returned home and encountered the killer or killers who were still in the home. Cliff was then ambushed and shot along with little Jimmy and then later Debbie.
So let's rewind and talk a little bit about Christine Walker. She married Cliff when she was just 19, but it is said that she wasn't very happy in her marriage. Cliff made $222 a month, just enough to cover the basics and not much else. Other women in the town had nice clothes and cars, and Christine had very little, which made her feel jealous and unhappy. She envied her sister, who had married well and had more money. But in a letter written to her mother not long before the murders, Christine said that even though her sister had a lot more clothes than I have, she still hasn't got what I've got. I've got a husband and a happy home. Now, during her teenage years, Christine was said to have been quite a looker. She flaunted her figure by wearing short shorts and tight tops. She was also very flirtatious, and there were many men who wanted to marry her before she chose Cliff. Even later, some people in the town said she would dress a little too sexy for a married woman. Now remember, again, this is 1959.
Definitely a different time for fashion.
For her shopping trip that day, Christine chose a sheer red and white print dress and high heels. Her first stop was at the IGA, where Christine mentioned to Thelma Tills, the store manager, that she was upset with Cliff because he had gotten into a fight on Thursday. However, she declined to reveal the details. The day before, when her mother-in-law stopped by for a visit, Christine told her, "Your son like to got killed yesterday," but when she saw Cliff approaching, clammed up and said nothing more about the incident.
Okay, so now back at the crime scene. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office were called in to investigate. Now, when Sheriff Ross Boyer arrived at the Walker home that morning, his deputies were already at the scene. And according to an article in the Sarasota Herald the following day, everyone was, quote, visibly shaken by what they saw. Now, there were signs that Christine had fought really hard for her life, and there was blood all over the kitchen, and one of her bloody high heels was found on the porch, suggesting that she had used the heel of her shoe on the assailant during the fight. So she was giving it everything she had. Now, even though she apparently made it out the door at one point, the killer managed to get her back into the house, threw her onto Jimmy's bed, and shot her twice in the head before or after raping her. The details aren't exact on that. Now, she was obviously still fighting when she was shot because the first bullet wound was superficial, and the second shot was right into the top of her skull. Additionally, the killer pulled a quilt over the bloodstained pillow on Jimmy's bed and used another quilt to wipe the blood from Christine's legs prior to dragging her across the floor towards the living room.
It appeared as if Cliff was taken out immediately when he entered the home with a gunshot right between the eyes. Little Jimmy was shot 3 times in the head. By the way it looked, it appeared as if the first shot to Jimmy's head didn't kill him, and he crawled to his father's side before being shot twice more. Sheriff Boyer surmised the perpetrator used his last bullet on 1-year-old Debbie, and when she did not die immediately, he took her to the bathroom, used a sock to block the drain, and ran about 4 inches of water so that he could hold her face down in the tub until she went limp.
Yeah, it's definitely a horrific scene, Lauren. Well, physical evidence left at the scene included a bloody cowboy boot print, a cellophane strip from a cool cigarette wrapper, and a fingerprint on the bathtub faucet handle. Now, a walk through the house revealed that some key items were actually missing from the home. Cliff's pocket knife was missing, Christine's high school majorette uniform, which I find to be very odd. Perhaps most interestingly, the couple's marriage license was missing. Now, based on the missing items, investigators theorized that the Walker's killer must have known the couple and was maybe even in love with or had some infatuation with Christine. Now, given that she was sexually assaulted and was the first to be murdered, that definitely would seem more likely.
Yes. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. And we're back. So the first to be suspected was Daniel McLeod, the man who discovered the bodies, but he passed a polygraph and was quickly ruled out. Albert Walker, a cousin of Cliff's with a violent streak, was the next person they looked at. He attended the funeral of his cousin and his family. Albert Walker wailed and became so distraught he fainted twice. Family members were sure he was faking his grief and described him as wild and a man who got rowdy and belligerent when drinking. Cliff's brother told investigators Albert was, quote, the type of person who would commit a crime of this nature. Albert was investigated and questioned at length, but when he was strapped into the polygraph machine, he passed. However, in 1987, Lieutenant Max Skeens, a polygraph expert, declared old polygraph results were essentially worthless. In 2006, Albert Walker submitted a sample for DNA testing, and his DNA did not match that in the semen stain on Christine Walker's panties.
So he passed the polygraph, but they do have DNA, and he passed that. So it maybe it's polygraph.
But we're going to find out here in a minute that the DNA, there's some problems with the DNA. So let's just keep going here.
Okay. Wilbur Tooker. Now, this is a 65-year-old retired railroad worker who lived approximately a mile southwest of the Walker home and the family's closest neighbor. Now, Christine's mother told investigators her daughter dreaded Tooker's visits and had once confided to her sister that the only way to stop the, quote, dirty old man was with a bullet. Now, apparently, the man had attempted to kiss Christine, and he actually propositioned her several times. Now, this prompted Cliff to threaten to kill Tooker and warn him if he came around the house again, he would indeed be sorry. But Tooker had an airtight alibi for the afternoon and the evening of December 19th, so he was ruled out. Unfortunately, I could not find out any info on what his alibi was. I have no idea what that alibi was, but apparently investigators were able to vet him.
At one point, serial killer Emmett Monroe Spencer confessed to the crime in a letter that proved to be cleverly constructed from real murders written up in newspapers and true crime novels that he liked to read, according to an article on investigationdiscovery.com.
Not sure why serial killers try to boost their numbers like that. It's quite disgusting. So the investigators in this case worked frantically to find the culprit, ultimately interviewing 587 potential suspects or witnesses, only to have the case go cold on them. Now, the case stayed stagnant for over 60 years until in 2007, Sarasota County Sheriff's Detective Kimberly McGath reopened the file and worked for the next 5 years to connect the killings to Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, who it turned out had been among the original suspects back in 1960. So these names are not new to the case.
So who are Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, you may ask? Smith and Hickok had been convicted and executed for the 1959 murders of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas. Smith and Hickok were recently paroled from the Kansas State Penitentiary. A former cellmate of Hickok's, Floyd Wells, had been a farmhand for Herb Clutter. Wells told Hickok that Clutter kept large amounts of cash in a safe in their home. After learning this information, Hickok hatched a plan to steal the safe and start a new life in Mexico. Hickok contacted Smith, who was another former cellmate, about committing the robbery with him. On the evening of November 14, 1959, Hickok and Smith drove more than 400 miles across the state of Kansas to the Clutter residence to execute their plan. When they arrived at the Clutter home in the middle of the night, they entered through an unlocked door. Side note, always lock your doors, folks. They woke the family, tied them up, and searched for the safe. Upon realizing that there was no safe, and the Clutter family did all their businesses using checks, not cash, Smith, notoriously unstable and prone to violent acts in fits of rage, slit Herb Clutter's throat and then shot him in the head. Kenyon, Nancy, and Bonnie Clutter were each murdered by a single gunshot blast to the head. It is also said that Smith prevented Hickok from raping Nancy Clutter. Now, Smith and Hickok were the subjects of Truman Capote's book, In Cold Blood, believed to be the first real true crime novel. Capote learned of the quadruple murder before the killers were captured, and he traveled to Kansas to write about the crime. He was accompanied by his childhood friend and fellow author, Harper Lee, author of To Kill a Mockingbird, and they interviewed residents and investigators assigned to the case and took thousands of pages of notes. In Cold Blood was an instant success and is the second best-selling true crime book in history, behind Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter about the Charles Manson murders. There was a movie made about Truman Capote and his writings in the book. It was titled Capote and was released in 2005. Capote grossed $28.8 million in the United States and won several awards.
Well, this Clutter case bore eerie similarities to the Walker case. Both were quadruple homicides with both parents and 2 children being slaughtered. Also, Christine was raped, and like Lauren mentioned earlier, there was a rape element in the Clutter case where Hickok tried to rape Nancy Clutter, but was prevented by Perry Smith. So that's not what he wanted to do. So obviously, Perry didn't want that to occur.
Right.
Doesn't mean it wasn't going to. So following the Kansas massacre, Smith and Hickok had stolen a Chevrolet Bel Air and hightailed it to Florida. On the morning of the Walker murders, the duo checked out of a Miami Beach motel. Later that day, they shopped in a store in Sarasota. Now, this store is only a few miles from the crime scene. Now, according to the Tampa Bay Times, a number of residents, including a saleswoman at the department store in Sarasota, said they'd seen Smith and Hickok in the days surrounding the Walker killings. Didn't pin it to that day, but knew it was real close to the time. So these men were no doubt in the area.
On December 30th of 1959, cops picked up Smith and Hickok in Las Vegas for the Clutter killings. Reportedly, they passed a polygraph exam in regard to the Walker murders, so police didn't pursue it further. But remember, like we just said a few minutes ago,
polygraphs aren't all that reliable.
Polygraphs were pretty much worthless back then. But in police reports, there are some statements that the Walker family had been in the market for a Chevy Bel Air. That's the same car that Smith and Hickok were driving. There is a theory that Christine had let the men inside the home, thinking they were there to show her and her husband the car. Hickok and Smith confessed to the murders of the Clutter family, for which they were hanged in April of 1965, but always denied the killings of the Walker family. Truman Capote dedicated several pages of his book to the theory that Smith and Hickok may have been responsible for the murders of the Walker family, but concluded that he didn't think they were responsible because they had alibis. Despite what Capote asserted at the time, subsequent investigations have since revealed holes in Hickok and Smith's alibis, and some experts have asserted that polygraph tests of the era, like I just said, were notoriously unreliable.
Yeah, Lauren, you can't say that enough. I mean, it's a great tool for leads, but not a good tool for determination.
Yeah.
So in December 2012, Detective Kimberly McGath, who we mentioned earlier, now she had been working on the Walker case since 2007. Now, she initiated the exhumation of the Kansas killers, and the state of Florida exhumed the bodies of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok to collect DNA for testing against evidence in the Walker case. But the results of those tests had so far failed to connect the Walker murders to the Kansas killers. Now instead, they had exposed contamination and bungling at state labs in Kansas and Florida and revealed that the investigators didn't actually have a true copy of Christine's results. No, Christine's what?
DNA.
A true copy of Christine's DNA. Results of the killer's bones showed Smith's tooth returned to profile for the examiner who had analyzed the bones. Now, his femur produced another unknown female profile. So, apparently, something got taken from the wrong thing, or basically there was contamination. So, DNA
it's
was
hard
showing
to tell
up.
exactly what went on here.
Yeah, DNA was showing up for the wrong people, the wrong parts.
It just got really messed up.
Well, the Kansas lab did capture partial DNA for both men, and the DNA found in Christine's underwear was not theirs. Now, this was a Kansas report that came out regarding the DNA. Now, McGath scanned thousands of pages looking for original DNA tests of Christine's underwear that had uncovered a male suspect. That's when she realized that the DNA profile they'd been using to compare their suspects all these years was likely Christine's DNA. So it was hers all along. It makes it a little tough to find somebody.
Right, if you're using the wrong DNA.
Correct. A Florida Department of Law Enforcement serology supervisor confirmed the news, explaining that what was thought to be sperm from a suspect was more likely Christine's blood or skin cells.
Okay, so just let me get this straight for our listeners. So all of these years, they had been using this DNA profile to compare against possible suspects, thinking that this DNA was from sperm found in Christine's underwear.
Correct.
Now we find out that this DNA that they've been using is actually Christine's own DNA.
Correct.
Okay. I want to make sure that we're all crystal clear on this.
Well, a lot of evidence in this case had been kind of contaminated, misplaced, or destroyed. Now, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement lost a semen sample from Christine's underwear, and the FBI destroyed Hickok and Smith's palm prints, especially problematic after a fingerprint examiner revealed that what was thought to be a fingerprint used to exonerate the men, which was found on the bathroom tub faucet, was actually a partial palm print. I mean, this is an absolute mess. So they've got a lot of problems, but I think that brings us to where we are right now.
Yes, and let's take a quick break and we'll be back. Okay, and we are back. So, when Detective Brandon Clark took over the case in 2019, he again submitted Christine's underwear to the lab for DNA testing. It produced two people's DNA, one female and another male, but the results were too mixed to identify anyone. Although most people now believe it was Smith and Hickok who killed the Walkers, let's just take a look at some other ideas. Now, Christine had mentioned to two different people, Thelma Tills, the store manager at the IGA, and her mother-in-law, that Cliff had gotten into a fight a few days before the murders. We still don't know who he fought with or why, but what if somebody was angry with him or seeking revenge?
That's always a possibility.
Right.
So a little more information on that would be nice if we could find more information on what that fight was about. But it does not exist.
Right. Well, I mean, this case is from 1959. It's old and cold. Most of the people involved are no longer with us. So we're working with what we got here.
Yeah. Well, after a few months after the murders, 3 women discovered some bloody clothing, including 2 shirts, a skirt and a blouse, pants, and a handkerchief, in a shed near the Walker home. The items belonged to Cliff and Christine Walker, and it was assumed that the killer used the clothing to wipe the blood off himself. So the fact the articles of clothing were found in a location near the scene bolstered suspicion that the perpetrator was someone familiar with the area. I mean, is it possible as a local man? That's what I'm convinced.
Another reason some suspected a local killer was because he murdered the 2 young children. Now, at ages 1 and 3, in all probability, the toddlers would not have been able to identify a stranger. Thus, there would have been no reason to kill them. However, there was a possibility Jimmy, who had turned 3 the previous August and could talk, would have been able to reveal the identity of a man that he knew. Detective Clark developed a theory that a neighbor, William Tooker, might be the killer. Another neighbor observed him in the area in the afternoon of the murders, and he had a crush on Christine, and we've already mentioned him earlier. And Tooker, whose descendants had provided buccal swabs for DNA testing, could not be discounted as a contributor to the DNA found mixed with Christine's DNA in her underwear.
Well, there were local rumors that Christine was having an affair with a man named Curtis McCall. Now, McCall's cousin, Harlan McCall, told the sheriff he knew for a fact that Curtis and Christine were having an affair. And McCall was known as a violent man prone to troublemaking And they did mention that he owned a .22 handgun. Remember, that was the firearm used in the murders.
Right.
Now, when questioned by Sheriff Boyer, Curtis McCall denied ever dating Christine Walker before or after her marriage and claimed that he sold his .22 handgun, but couldn't remember when he sold it or who he sold it to. Now, he was polygraphed twice, but both times he was so nervous the tests were deemed inconclusive. I say you keep doing it until you get it right.
Wow.
Now, however, there were strong indications that he was lying on this polygraph when asked, have you withheld any information from the law enforcement officers about the Walker murder?
Interesting. So here's kind of like a one-off outlier. An anonymous woman called the Sarasota Sheriff's Office on August 5th, 1994. She said she was a bartender in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and one of her regular customers confessed to her on August 4th, the day before she made the phone call, that he killed a family named Walker many years ago in Osprey, Florida, when he was a young man. She said she had been talking to the man when he started crying. When she asked him why he was crying, he told her about the murders. The bartender told police the man was white and in his 60s. She believed he was retired and worked odd jobs around the Stroudsburg area. She also said she believed he was a gun buff. She hung up without identifying herself, but said she would call back with more information. She never called back. So in July of this year, 2023, investigators exhumed the body of Christine and Cliff Walker, where they were buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Arcadia, Florida, to attempt to get DNA from them. Although the couple had been buried for 64 years, the vaults that held their casket had cracked and flooded. There were skeletal remains left that could be tested for DNA. According to the Tampa Bay Times, District 12 medical examiner Russell Vega called the exhumation a success and that the Walkers would likely be the first to be run through the office's new CT scanner. It creates a three-dimensional reconstruction of the body skeleton and will give investigators a better picture of their injuries.
Well, Detective Clark said their bones would also be sent to a private lab to identify and remove Christine and Cliff's DNA from a mixture found in 2019 in Christine's underwear. Now, that would allow the scientists to release out the genetic code of the sperm cell so it could be uploaded to Common Ancestry website to find relatives. This is precisely what Themis Project wants to get involved in.
Right, yes. And the things that they're doing with DNA these days is so amazing, especially the familial DNA. So in 2021, detectives in Montana identified the killer of a teenage couple in 1956 with genetic genealogy and a single sperm cell. So it's not inconceivable that we may be getting answers in this Walker case very soon.
Fingers are crossed.
Detective Clark told the Tampa Bay Times that he doesn't know how long it will take for the latest results or even if they will produce answers, but he sounded confident. That's how we're going to solve this, Clark said. It's probably our best shot.
I think DNA is working to solve a lot of stuff.
Yes.
But as of right now, the Walker family murders continues to remain unsolved and cold. So if you know anyone that may have lived in that area or nearby, ask them if they ever have heard of the Walker family. Ask, because you never know the story they might have to tell. You might hear, oh, well, I heard this or I heard this. And if something sounds, no matter what you hear, pick up the phone and call.
Right.
Yeah.
And Christine's brother, his name is Pat Myers. And I've actually been trying to get in touch with him without any luck as far as this recording. But he is still alive and well, and he is still searching for answers into who killed his sister. So there's still a family. Even though this case is so old, there is still a family who wants answers. So you know what we always say, if you see something, if you know something, say something.
Yeah, exactly, Lauren. You gotta ask the questions of people that were in the area, or if you've heard a story, let somebody know the story, because again, answers are out there.
Yes.
The answers are there. And even if you find or people find or sheriff's office find that if they can find out who the killer was, even if he's deceased, then this case can be put to rest with some closure.
Right.
And that is what most cold cases need to end up in.
All right, everyone, that's it for this episode.
Please remember to check out our website for links to all of our social media, our Patreon, our merch store, and much, much more.
And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thank you all for listening
To Paradise After Dark.
Dark, dark, dark.